And we've existed here for a long time, and you can take classes in any department from English to psychology to sociology. And it's not many credits if you wish to pursue the concentration. It's 12 credits, and you can talk to me if you're interested in that. But without further ado, we're going to get started. But I do want to thank Safe Zone and also the Women's and Gender Studies Club for co-sponsoring this event, for everyone who is here. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Halberstam. Dr. Jack Halberstam is a visiting professor of gender studies and English at Columbia University.
Yeah, just a professor.
Oh, okay. Just
done
professor.
visiting.
Done visiting.
Yeah.
Here to stay. That's good news for New York. Sorry, maybe I should check on with you for the rest of this. The author of 5 books, including Skin Shows, Gothic Horror, and the Technology of Monsters, Female Masculinity, and A Queer Time and Place, The Queer Art of Failure, and Gaga Feminism, Sex, Gender, and the End of Normal. Jack has written articles that have appeared in numerous journals, magazines, and collections, and has co-edited a number of anthologies, including Posthuman Bodies with Ira Livingston, and a special issue of Social Text with Jose Munoz and David Eng, titled What's Queer About Queer Studies Now? Jack is a popular speaker and gives lectures around the country and internationally every year. Jack's recent book is Trans, A Quick and Dirty Account of Gender Variability, and I'm just really glad to have Jack here. And I'm Red Washburn. I'm in Women and Gender Studies and English on campus, and today we're just going to have an informal chat about trans lives and transdisciplinary studies. And if we'll save some time for questions, or if people want to jump in. So I'm going to just shoot to you first. Just generally, what does trans mean to you? And there's a mic if you want to use it.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Are most people here students and faculty in the college? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And for the students, are you people who have taken gender studies classes or might be interested in them? No. I got a no over there. Anybody has taken gender studies classes in the past? Well, 1 person, 2 people. Awesome. Okay. Okay. So we're here to, talk a little bit about what we do, why it might be important, and why you might be interested in it. But also to think about the climate that we're in right now, right? Which is a really politically dire climate of the sort of, re-entrenchment of patriarchal values, a very clear polarization between rich people and poor people, defunding of college programs, all kinds of things are going on that I think what Red is trying to do here is call attention to some things that might be happening on your campus that you might not know about. Now, the question of trans is an interesting one. Trans people have existed in a way as long as we have understood modern gender roles. So we really talk about trans people just in terms of, say, the last 75, 80 years, because the roles of masculine and feminine, male and female, took on a very particular form in the contemporary world. So prior to capitalism or prior to the late 19th century, there were different social arrangements that people existed in. There also was no sort of surgical or medical setup that would allow people to transition between their from the gender into which they were born to the one that they decided to live in. So we really think about trans as a very contemporary modern concept, okay? But here's the thing about trans, and you're like, well, okay, so there are people out there who feel that they were born into a body that doesn't match with who they are. What's the big deal? The big deal is every one of you has a gender, and that gender is part of a system. Okay, you don't have a gender, and your gender means nothing separate from everyone else also having a gender, and that gender also meaning something. Do you get what I'm saying? So if you're like, hey, I'm just a man, that's just who I am. Well, just a man, your masculinity means something in relationship to the men around you and to the women who are not masculine in the way that you are. So when you see somebody, you immediately do a read on them. Is this a man or a woman? And in order to make that read, you gather all kinds of information very, very quickly. Therefore, this is a system, and it is a system in which people's embodiment means something in relation to others. It's a social structure that we are all embedded in, okay? Where you have a binary system, guess what? Where you have a binary system, some people will cross-identify, inevitably. So if you grow up, you're born into a female body, let's just use that as an example. You're a super active little girl, you're always playing boys' games because those appeal to you. And why are they boys' games? If it's a game, can't anyone play it? You want to play that, you're dressing a certain way, people continually mistake you for a boy. You are being gendered by the culture as much as you have a kind of internal narrative as well. Do you see what I'm saying? And then at a certain moment, you might be like, you know what? Given everything about me, I feel more like a boy than a girl. Now, that is partly who you are, not genetically, but maybe part of the way in which your particular mechanism has been built, nurtured, arranged, and so on. Or anyone digs in to the idea that there are just men and women, the more transgender people will emerge. Because as long as there's a binary, some bodies, inevitably, in a complex society, will feel that their gender and their sex, as assigned at birth, are at odds with each other. So we shouldn't be saying to trans people, what's wrong with you? How could that be possible? How has that happened? You have created exactly that possibility by being a nodal point within a system that is organized around polarized gender options, okay? So if you're like, I'm a man because I'm not a woman, I'm a woman because I'm not a man, some people are gonna cross that boundary in ways that are unpredictable, varied, and have different meanings. So when we strike out at trans people, and we're like, there's something wrong. What's wrong with that person? When we strike out at that person, we're missing our target. If you feel that there's something wrong here, the thing that is wrong is the system, not the person, okay? Any more than in any of the other systems that we use to identify ourselves. We should not blame poor people for being poor. Why are they poor? The system demands poor people in order for there to be rich people. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, well, what's the point of that? You can't blame poor people for being poor in a capitalist system that says a few will have much and many will have little. That's not the fault of poor people, right? Any more than in relationship to the way in which we have organized gender norms, we should be saying that the people who fall outside of those norms are to blame. They are not to blame. They are the exact product of the system that you are, okay? Therefore, trans people who in the past have been bullied, have been brutalized, have been murdered, right? Those people have been engaged in incredible activism over the past 25 years, and we have changed the culture. We have completely changed the culture. So, Caitlyn Jenner, how many people have heard of Caitlyn Jenner? Okay, how many people have heard of Kate Bornstein? Okay, Caitlyn Jenner did not change anything. Okay, Caitlyn Jenner is part of a Kardashian empire that's like, what can we do now? We got another 15 shows to deliver and Kanye's not wanting to be in the picture, right? Okay, what about Caitlyn, right? Caitlyn is money making for the Kardashian media empire. Put Caitlyn Jenner to one side. She is the beneficiary of 25 years of hardcore transgender activism carried out by people like Kate Bornstein, Sandy Stone, and others who have been on the front lines saying, I'm going to stand up. Kate Bornstein is a 6'3" person who was in the army as a young man, came out later in life as a trans woman, and said, okay, you people think I'm a freak? I'm going to go around the country. You can have a good look. You can get over whatever it is that you think you're worried about in relation to me. Keep looking until you're done, and then you will accept me. And that's what she did for 25 years. That is a trans activist, not someone who's like, how can we get more lip gloss on sale for the Kardashians, okay? So the way media works in the world that we live in, we pull these people out of, you know, popular culture, and we make it seem as if they are the heroes. And then Caitlyn will make some, you know, completely banal statement about tolerance of trans people. That's not what we're after. Nobody's looking for tolerance. No one's asking you to accept them. What I'm saying is trans people are part of the system that you yourself are a part of. If you don't like that there are trans people or gay people, then you have to think about what's happened in the system that has made those people into the people who seem wrong, with a system that it has many, many other problems in it. Like, what we should really be worried about is, why do we still have domestic abuse? Why do men still earn more than women? Why do most poor people in this country, why most poor people are made up of single women with kids? That's what we should be worried about, not whether somebody is gay, straight, trans, or cis. Those things are very, very easy for us as a community to get behind. So that's what I kind of want to talk with you guys about. And here's the thing about the university. The university or the college is one of the very few places where you can talk about these things in terms of a system. The media won't do that. You know, the conversations you have in the grocery store, at the bar, people aren't, you know, reading Karl Marx and coming back with a critique of capital anywhere but the university. And that is why people like Trump want to close down universities and colleges, because when people get educated, people get angry, people get smart, people make change, right? And that's what we are about in gender studies. We're not trying to look at gender separate from other forces of social differentiation. We are trying to think about gender alongside class, race, nation, globalization, capitalism, dispossession. All of those things are important, as important to gender studies as they are to other programs on this campus. And by the way, if you dismantle gender and sexuality, it will be a lot easier to now go down the hall and dismantle ethnic studies. And then after that, why do we need African American studies? And then after that, let's get back to the real stuff, history, English, things that don't seem to have a political orientation behind them. Do you see what I'm saying? So I believe, and I hope that, you know, this is a struggle we're all engaged in, what is best for the interdisciplinary programs on any campus is solidarity. Solidarity, even if you don't necessarily agree or you don't see eye to eye, we need to be in solidarity so that the college can't pick us off. Does anyone want to make a comment or ask a question? You want to throw another log on the fire there, Red?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking a little bit about what trans means, and as Jack pointed out, change happens through people doing things, right? So this campus, when I started, didn't have gender-neutral bathrooms, and that's just one issue. And that started with some of the students who are advocating for these things. I've tried to change my name on this campus, and I still have not been able to do that. So I think it takes people kind of advocating to do this work for things to change. And I think that trans could be a number of things. It could be about gender nonconformity, it could be about genderqueer issues, non-binary issues, M to F issues, F to M, that whole spectrum. And I know your earlier work speaks to that a lot, female masculinity, and then even continuing with gender variance in this very accessible way. So people have, you know, the ability to digest this information that's happening all over the news. It's happening in the world, even though it's existed, you know, since Joan of Arc, you know, but there's a political consciousness that's emerged, at least through some of the shifts during the Obama administration, certainly under Trump,
right,
where the dialogue has changed. But I think that, you know, one of the most fundamental things as humans that we should be given access to do is to define ourselves, right, and to practice self-determination and express ourselves. And if we don't have that, what do we have? And I think your points about systemic issues are really important, because I've been studying gender before I did my PhD in it, and gender for me is just, and gender and sexism and cisgenderism, those are systems of power. And as you pointed out, thinking about power relations is really important, because we have to be able to question the society in which we live if we want to have some kind of sense of freedom, right? And we want to have some sense of expression or autonomy. And I guess this connects to why this is important. Why is it important to talk about trans issues at this moment politically? And I know you talked a little bit about Trump, and Trump is just a symbol of it, but why is it important now, especially with, you know, the attack on gender studies programs and changes to federal policy?
You know, I don't know if you guys remember or anyone even watched the Republican National Convention where they nominated Trump, you know, to run for the presidency, but he was really interesting in that speech. I mean, it was just sort of a blatant nod to inclusivity. He said, I just want to say to LGBT people and their parents that I'm here to protect you. He said this during his nomination speech. Okay, but it gets worse. He said, I'm here to protect you from foreign threats. Okay, now that's really sneaky. Okay, because it's like, hey, parents of endangered people and those endangered people, I'm here, I'm your president, I'm here to protect you. From whom? From white supremacists with guns, whoever the next guy is who's going to go off, start shooting people. Who are we to be protected from? Foreign threats. Okay, that's a dog whistle for Muslims, basically, is what he's saying. There are people who hate LGBT people, he's saying. It's not us. It's not white men with guns. It's not Christians. It's foreign threats. And that's the kind of, you know, material that this administration fearmongers on. And he used the Orlando Pulse shootings, remember that? Where there was a very disgruntled guy who did go into a gay nightclub. There's the problem with homophobia, okay, right there. That guy, there's much debate about who Omar Mateen, I think his name was, who exactly he was. Was he actually gay? Was he repressing his homosexuality? At any rate, he went into a nightclub in Orlando, Florida, started shooting. That's what homophobia buys you, is a guy who cannot acknowledge his own feelings and therefore decides, if I can't be gay, no one can be. Goes into a club, starts shooting. By the way, not everyone in there is gay. And that's a very good illustration then that homophobia could kill everyone in that club. Not everyone in there is gay, but everyone's going to get shot. So the whole point about homophobia is it doesn't hurt some of us. It hurts all of us. And all that Trump wanted to do in that speech was try to claim the moral high ground from which he would claim to be a supporter of a set of people that he in fact has declared war on. Within months of taking office, he turned back Obama's bathroom bill, and I'll talk about the bathroom situation in a moment. He turned back Obama's bathroom bill and suggested that he no longer wanted to see trans people in the military. Why not? Because why should the military foot the bill for sex reassignment surgeries? Can I tell you how tiny? First of all, they're not paying for anyone's sex reassignment surgeries, believe you me. Almost no one pays for those surgeries but the people themselves. You can be sure of it. Second, the idea that this inflated military budget is being wasted on the surgeries of the 3 trans people who are asking for them is absolutely moronic. I hope that nobody can fall for that kind of stupidity. But, you know, given that so many people voted for Trump in this country, we can't be sure of that. Therefore, we have to continue to produce these counter-narratives saying, this is not about trans people taking up resources. This is about looking for internal enemies so that you can unite, basically, white middle-class people in America against common enemies. And LGBT people are good people for, you know, the Christian wing of the Republican Party to attack. In terms of bathrooms, let me just say something about that, which is that everyone has the right to use a bathroom without being challenged. And, you know, let me use myself as an example. Some of you may think, you know, I don't know, little odd, little strange gender going on there. But, you know, and I'm not trying to be recognizable as either a woman, nor am I trying to pass as a man. My gender is my gender. But over the years, I have been challenged in more women's bathrooms than I care to remember about whether I'm in the right bathroom, okay? And for trans people, particularly people who have actually transitioned, it's very dangerous to be using bathrooms where you're going to be challenged. Now, the main reason that people didn't want to create gender-neutral bathrooms was this fantasy that was circulating, which was, we can't have women's bathrooms in which trans women might be entering. Because why? Because trans women might attack women. Do you know who attacks women in women's bathrooms? Men. Men attack women. What are you worried about? What are the numbers? The numbers are that if someone gets attacked in a women's bathroom, it's by a cisgendered heterosexual man. That's the concern. Tell me how many trans women do we know of who have attacked cisgendered women in a bathroom? None. Not a single case, right? Not, you know of somebody? No.
No, I said zero.
Zero. Do you know how many trans people appear in serial killer films as a serial killer? I'm serious, okay? Dressed to Kill, and I love that film, okay? Sleepaway Camp, and I love that film.
Silence of the Lambs, yeah.
Silence of the Lambs, and I love that film. But in each and every one, there is a trans person who could not transition and therefore went on a killing rampage. Do you know in the history of the US how many times that has happened? Never. Do you know how many cisgendered men have gone on killing rampages? Let's just say in the last 2 months, right? Many. White guys with guns would be a profile that we should be worried about. Trans women in women's bathrooms, not so much, okay? So the bathroom issue is merely saying, in public space, where we have many kinds of genders that people are not too adept at reading, let's have some gender-neutral bathrooms in which people, whoever they are, however they understand themselves, can go. That doesn't stop you going somewhere. It gives you another option. And it says, by the way, where we have binary gendered bathrooms, we are creating problems for the many thousands of trans people, or even slightly gender ambiguous people whom we live among. And that could be like, I mean, I'm not being insulting or anything, but this could be like a female relative of yours who just is a little older and has short hair. She also could be challenged in a bathroom. I was going to say it could be your mom. I don't want to say that. I'm trying to say anyone can be misread in a bathroom because we live in a world with multiple genders, but we're acting as if we live in a world with two. Do you see? The bathroom is not the issue. It's the fact that the bathroom is being used to police people, even as we live in a culture with many, many more genders than we have actually named. So where people are being policed around a basic function of using the bathroom, we can then see and call attention to the fact that there's sort of transphobic assumptions in that public space. So that's why Red's talking about the bathroom, not to say, I want special privileges. No one's asking for a special privilege. People are asking to use facilities that are there for everyone. And this is a big target in high schools. Like, why, we don't want our kids, knowing about trans people. Guess what? Kids know there are trans people. It's adults who are the problem. Kids of 5, 6, 7, 8 are growing up in a different world than I did, different world than even any of you did. And they are not phobic. They are made phobic. They are made phobic by their parents. So if you go into an elementary school and you say to the kids, do you mind if Joni uses the boys' room because Joni feels more like a boy? Oh yeah, no problem, no problem. You know who minds? Johnny's parents mind, because they don't want their kid getting ideas. Do you see? That's how normalization works. It says, I don't mind, but I don't want my child being confused. You don't want your child being confused? Meanwhile, my child is going to get beaten up. So your child's confused. That seems like a small price for me to pay to make sure that my kid is safe and can use the bathroom. Do you see? Confusion is not a reason for violent reaction. It isn't. Be confused. You go to college to be confused, quite honestly. You do. Think how often you're confused in a college classroom. I know I was a lot, okay? Like, what? But that's the thing about a learning process. What you hear today will come back to you possibly in 5 years. Learning doesn't happen like that, and if it does, it wasn't worth knowing, okay? Learning is a slow boil, and a lot of what we're talking about, thinking about what we see happening in the world today around trans issues, in 5 years we're going to be like, what the hell was the fuss about? We really are. That's how it works. So the thing is to get ahead of history and not be behind it. If this college thinks that gender studies is expendable, it is not at all in the same kind of conversation that the rest of the nation is. In fact, around the country, gender studies programs are bulking up and are being given resources. This is not the time that you close down or downsize gender studies. That said, we also have to have very viable gender studies programs with students enrolled in them. You know, I know at my college, at Columbia, I just took over gender studies this year. I said, how many majors do we have? They're like 4. I'm like, no. We can't have 4 majors. We got to have more majors. You know, that's how these programs work. So a lot of things have to happen to make a program robust and to allow it to stand up to the attacks that they are inevitably under. But the main thing is to understand why it is important that we have these areas of learning. If we all already knew everything there was to know about gender variance, about homophobia, about how heterosexuality is perpetrated as a norm, even though it can be very toxic in its majority expression. If we already knew all that, we wouldn't need these programs, and that would be a happy day. We are not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a couple of things.
Do you want to ask them whether they...
Sure. Does anyone want to jump in?
You can ask, basic questions.
Just to add, you mentioned about the foreign threat that Trump mentioned in his speech. I mean, just last night in Mississippi, when he campaigning for the Senate seat there, and he said that Mike Espy, the African-American candidate, where does he fit in? He doesn't fit in here.
Right.
So it's the same thing, you know, Espy is a foreign threat, you know, as an African-American candidate. So it's just the same.
Right.
Garbage.
That's an important thing to realize, that when Trump says foreign, he generally is talking about anyone who is not, you know, white, middle class, Christian, which is his base. And he will find ways to connect foreign threats to, let's say, internal immigrant communities. And he does that repeatedly. Or even African Americans who we can't rely on to deliver certain kinds of policies. So this is why solidarity is the important point. Even if you're just like, why should I care about gay people and trans people? That's not my life. That's not in my community. You have to care, because in their eyes, we're all a threat. We're all a threat. And our strength is in numbers and solidarity and in recognizing that what hurts some of us hurts all of us. I really, really mean that.
Yeah, just a quick note about that. There is a woman who was killed in New Mexico, Roxana Hernandez Rodriguez, and this is part of this culture of violence, and these issues are really important to talk about, and knowledge is really connected to preventing violence. And I think this is in conversation with not just issues in the military. I do a lot of work in prisons, and the fact that she was in an ICE detention center for coming into the country, quote unquote, illegally, and there was no investigation done on her dehydration, her HIV/AIDS status. All of that is political, and she's a woman of color, right? She's a trans woman of color. So what does that mean? It's all connected, and even someone like, you know, Trump, just last week, you know, took off employment protections for trans employees. And, you know, I kind of battle with the idea of recognition, because in some ways I do want to be a freak, like, you know, Auntie Kate, and I don't want to assimilate, but recognition carries a lot of power in terms of, you know, going to the bathroom, having an ID card, using a pool, you know, going to a locker, all these things. What does it mean to be human and to be recognized in a world that doesn't want you to exist is a political question. And we have to talk about these things in this political moment, because so many things have happened with this policy. We even have biologists like, you know, Ann Foster Sterling is talking biologically, intersex and trans people, there are 5 different genders biologically, and it doesn't make any cognitive sense. So what does it mean? Well, it's upholding the system, this idea of a personal family or a national family. and heterosexuality. You need that gender differentiation if you're trying to promote heterosexuality and white supremacy and go down the list.
And you know, Red, it's interesting in relationship to a lot of trans activism. At first, people were like, there was a lot of trans activism in relationship to the prisons because trans women were being put in prisons with men, and that, you can imagine, this is like a very dangerous thing for that person. But trans activists did not gather simply to say trans women need to go in the women's prison. That was not the focus of trans activism around prisons. Trans activism around prisons said we should not be putting people in prison, period. This isn't about whether you put the trans woman in the women's prison. Let's use this to show that this is an inhumane system. And so there is a very, very active transgender organization for prison abolition. And that's what we're trying to talk about, not just like, hey, I need support for my transition. That's not what it's about. It's about the way in which people are sort of grouped together as certain kinds of threats. And in a very liberal system, you just say, can the trans woman please go in the women's prison? In a radical system, you use that as a wedge and you say, we don't care what cage she goes in, we want to get rid of cages. We want to think about other ways to deal with what we have called crime, but what is often simply produced as a series of infractions that deserve punishment. So those are really the kind of radical wings of transgender activism. So I hope that people can see that this isn't a one-note project. It isn't just like, hey, could you be nicer to the trans people in your midst? This is a big political project. Gender binarism is the foundation for all kinds of systems that we are all governed by. Where that gender binary breaks down, we are all affected. So a trans person represents a tear in a system that we maybe don't like anyway, and we should be working together to pull down. Did you have your hand up?
I did. Yeah. My name's Mae Feely. I'm an adjunct lecturer in the Department of English. And I want to say I've been here since 2002. And when I started working here, there was so little recognition, outward recognition by the college of any of the LGBTQ issues. And I really want to acknowledge Steve and Safe Zone and the other folks who were involved in Safe Zone. Tisha is now involved in Safe Zone, because a lot of people, a lot of cis and straight people who are faculty here got involved with that. And I decided I teach freshman English 1 and 2. And freshman 1 is a class that is generally focused on the notion of language. And I started teaching about transgender in the context of structural linguistics in that class. And it's amazing how rich that kind of discussion becomes. So I really want to just emphasize and sort of question this notion, right, of like, it's this austerity thing, right? Like art and music and women and gender studies and, environmentalism and all of these other areas are pushed to the outside. So what is left is this institution taking on the role of training workers for the workforce. This is what the agenda has become in higher education all over the world, really. It's not just in the United States. And so I see this attack on women and gender studies. It's part of a contractual debate about release time and time for scholarship. You really hit on something important here, which is that this idea that we are that the issues related to transgender are coming from this larger structure of binary oppression, and that binary oppression is what needs to be studied. And you know what? You can study it in bio, and you can study it in poli-sci, and you can study it in any number of different disciplines. Yeah. I think the falsehood here is to push women and gender studies into some separate category because it's not, talk about trans, it's not transactional. It doesn't have, a ready market to hire the graduate who has studied that. But you know what? One last point. My son he studied political science in college, right? He now has an MBA and he works for a hospital doing all kinds of ungodly things in a hospital. But my point is, he's not out there being a politician.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you study,
Right.
it matters that you're educated.
That is correct.
And we can study these issues with great faculty
Yeah.
and really develop a robust institution. Otherwise, we're selling our souls.
Right, and the thing is, you could say, you know, gender studies isn't a separate, doesn't have to be some weird special interest thing, and a lot of these issues come up in poli-sci and other places. Here's the thing, poli-sci doesn't see why it doesn't really care about gender issues. In fact, most poli-sci departments around the country and most philosophy departments, they are very, very short on women and people of color, and particularly on women of color, okay? So this is not the answer to just say, we have disciplines, so let's let the disciplines take care of some of the politics around gender, class, race, and sexuality. We could do that. They won't do it. They won't do it. They haven't done it. They didn't do it. They will not do it. And as long as that's true, and in the next thing that, you know, when I give a little talk beginning at 12:30, I'm going to talk a little bit about disciplines. As long as that is true, we need gender and sexuality studies programs. We need ethnic studies. And people fought hard for those programs in the 1960s. People were on campuses fighting to have some kind of knowledge production that did not presume neutral subjects of history who just moved through history, progressing from one great victory to the next. We demanded some other forms of knowledge production, and this is what we got, and this is what we've built, and we can't just allow that to be dismantled as if we no longer need it. I wish we lived in a world where we didn't need ethnic studies and we didn't need gender and sexuality studies, but we're not in that world. We're really, really not. People who care about social justice, those people become gender studies and sexuality studies majors. People who think that education is about transformation take classes in ethnic studies and in gender and sexuality studies. We're not here just to become more cultured. We're not here just to know a little bit more about something. College, I mean, really, it's like, you know, universities are being undermined on a daily basis by the fact that we only value money in this culture. The only value is something that pays you a lot of money. And under those circumstances and in that environment, the college has a very, very important function. And that function is to sort of develop, raise, and nurture consciousness around issues most obviously demonstrated through inequality, persistent inequality. So I hope that we can recognize together the value of these programs and not just allow them to slip away, because that's what we're on the verge of. Maybe, what do you think? See if there's another question.
Do people have any questions, especially about interdisciplinary work? I mean, this is not something new, as Dr. Halberstam said. This has been around for 50 years. There's over 1,000 women in gender studies programs, a ton of area studies programs, as you mentioned, Jack. The political organization of knowledge is something that has, come out of social movements. It's been around for a really long time, and it's really important that we keep these intact if we really want to think about the politics of knowledge production. And also as students, I tell the students in my classes, it's really important for you to think critically and make your own intellectual decisions and take risks and accept that you are determining the course of your intellectual life, right? And maybe you want to be in a vocational track job. I went to community college, and that's what I thought my life was going to be. I didn't think I'd be sitting up here. I don't know about you or other people, but what does it mean for you as a student to be able to take classes on this campus that are about who you are and your own values? I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that, especially in this moment of Me Too and Black Lives Matter and the erasure of trans lives. There's a lot of things happening on this campus. Does anyone want to jump in? Any students? Faculty? You want to jump in, Jack?
Even if people have any basic questions about anything that's been said or history of these programs. I don't know, do you have ethnic studies on this campus?
No.
Nope. African American studies, Latino studies, Asian American studies.
No, and this was part of the issues.
Guess what? This is what you got. It's
Yeah.
gender and sexuality. Better hold on to that. And gender and sexuality studies is not supposed to be an isolated studies. It's supposed to be part of a suite of programs that, as I said, people fought for in the 1960s in student movements. They refused to be given knowledge in this absolutely unembodied, neutral way that had zero critique of US history in it, no accounts of slavery, for example. US history was told in a very particular way and was challenged by students who said, we want politically inflected knowledge. We don't want to be told things in this way as if this is how it is, this is how it's always been. I was an English major, and I was just given white guy poet after white guy poet to read for so many years. I'm like, wait, who else wrote something that I might want to read? It's ridiculous to have to come to that consciousness. It took me a long time, but these kinds of programs, they ask different questions, they move in different directions, they have different desired outcomes for the student at the end of the semester. So this is, and I know that Kingsborough is not trying to get rid of this program, I understand that, but at the same time it needs support in order to grow, in order for students to understand why they should take these classes or why they might want to be majors. It needs to be supported, and I think that that's all that Red is asking for, is for a level of support that would make this program legitimate.
Yeah, and I also just want to add, there's a number of interdisciplinary programs on this campus too. Professor Leggett here does global environmental studies.
Right.
Professor Fadum, who is not here this semester, was trying to do food studies. Professor Shi has been trying to do ethnic studies on this campus. And we've been trying to, solidarity, right? Been trying to, provide support for each other to try and create some kind of interdisciplinary base, and that's also not on the docket right now. So what does it mean to kind of reposition these knowledges where they're important and they're given, they're given support and funding? And, the numbers game is like an old game, and it's not appropriate because I was an English major too, and this was not just at community college, 4-year, Hunter, the numbers for English majors are low. There's concentrations that are not yet, designed that I totally support on this campus, and they have support. So what does it mean for a political field to not have support? Well, it's signaling something to the world, and I think it's also signaling something to CUNY and to Columbia and nationwide when you have entire departments supporting you, like Hunter, City Tech. You have professors like Dr. Halberstam here. You have Judith Butler. You have the president of the National Women's Studies Association, Pramila Madison, saying, I support this program. This was really important as the first community college in CUNY and of the first in the nation to have support. And we don't even have that much. But what
Can
does
I
that
ask
mean?
you, Red, then, like if there were people here who were listening from the administration, what is it that you're asking for?
Well, Dr. Leaker's here and has been a wonderful advocate. So, there's some wonderful folks. I love teaching, and my heart is with my students, but I need time to do this work. We had a course release in the fall and spring, but that's the least of it. I want students to have scholarships, and I want us to have a space where we convene. That's not a counseling center. I love the advocacy work on campus for the Women's Center. We work with the Women's Center Safe Zone. But what does it mean to have an academic space where students and faculty can talk about these issues as an intellectual endeavor? So we need an office, we need an administrative assistant, we want to be able to mentor students, and we want to be able to have programs like this, not as a fight, but as something that contributes to the pleasure and joy of learning, I want to be able to build this up. I did my PhD in Women and Gender Studies. There's a lot of resources. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have resources. So, I think it's really important, and I do think this is connected to the larger attacks on gender studies programs at a time where people are putting in more energy, and more time and more resources because of everything happening in the world.
Okay, I mean, I think we should probably wrap up this part, but I will just say that I think that it would be helpful to have a list of things that you want and present them and give, and I'm sure you've thought of all this, but just be really clear, and be really clear that, as far as I can tell, it isn't, no one's trying to shut down gender studies. It sounds like that there's more a question about whether this program is viable. And it is true what Red said, that English departments around the country are hemorrhaging enrollments. Hemorrhaging though. And I was in an English department before this at USC, where over 5 years, the English department enrollments were cut in half. And you know what? They didn't cut the resources to English. They weren't like, we've got to get rid of this program. You should. You probably should reimagine it as a large-scale culture project, and get rid of this emphasis on just the best thing that has ever been said in English and American literature over the last 200 years. Reinvent the damn discipline. But that wasn't the conversation. The conversation was, let's do some more hiring and put some more resources behind English and see if we can get it back on its feet. It's when it comes to gender and sexuality that we say, you don't have enough majors, or you don't seem to be making the contribution we want you to make. We might have to reconsider our commitment to you. You're not doing that with history, you're not doing that with English, don't do it here. By the same token, gender studies itself has to reach out to students. If it isn't appealing to students, it's not viable. So I think that our goal here is twofold: to address the problems, but also to say to people who may not know about gender studies, this is why you might come into our classrooms, this is what you might expect to find there, and this is why you should do it. Okay, I'm working, for example, at Columbia to get rid of the name Women Gender Studies, because I would like to see more men in my classes, and I'm generally teaching to 65, mostly white women who are already feminists. I'm just like, it's like preaching to the choir. They're all hallelujah on the first day and on the last day. And I'm like, well, did we move anywhere, right? Meanwhile, there are a lot of men on my campus, because I went and spoke about masculinity with a student group just a couple of weeks ago, who are deeply confused about sexuality and gender. But the last thing they're going to do is sign up for a class called Women, Gender, and Sexuality. So I'm trying to change the name of my program to just IGS, Institute for Gender and Sexuality Studies, in the hopes of bringing more young men into the classroom and speaking with them in historically situated ways about what masculinity is and how it's developed in the particular forms that we now see around us. Those seem like worthwhile projects in an era when we do have a problem with male violence. We do. It is mostly white guys, but all of the shootings that we've seen in the last 10 years have come from disgruntled young men who decided that if this society doesn't work for them, it's not going to work for anyone. And this is a good place for us to confront it. It really is. The history of masculinity is fascinating, and I'm happy in the next hour to tell you something about that. But this gender and sexuality is not just for LGBT people, because you all have sexualities, you all have genders, and we are all in that system that governs us through those things. Okay? Thank you for coming today, and